One of my first calls with Trystine about Satson, at one point in the call, she was like, because I love America. And we're in the exact same office, and she said that. I loved that. Welcome back to Bitcoin is Hard. This is a Choice App production about Bitcoin and personal finance. The esteemed guest today is Trystine Payfer, Director of Communications at Riot and founding member of Sat Center.
Thank you. Thank you, Brian. I'm excited to be here.
Launching Sat Center and the Christmas party last month was very exciting. We're now in 2022. So here's what we're going to do today for a few minutes is we're going to combine the worlds of kind of this personal finance area and how Bitcoin ties into it at like a family and individual level that we've been talking about. And we're going to combine it with the always rousing topic of like politics, which sounds weird, but I really love watching George Gammon on YouTube. And he says this thing where he's like, investors have had to go from answering and asking themselves like economic questions to have to ask and answer like government questions and political questions like to themselves. And so I don't think it's hyperbole to say the decisions that our local leaders make affect the personal finances of like us and our families. So with that as kind of the base layer, what is the goal of Sat Center as you see it?
The goal is educating people so that way we onboard more Bitcoiners, like first and foremost. But I also think it's creating the community and the landscape that you want to raise your family in. I think that's really important. Because, in general, we've seen a lot of the power go to Washington and away from our local communities, away from our city, away from our county, away from our state to Washington. And I think obviously with Bitcoin, this really changes that whole dynamic and it brings it back to localism. And so I think that is one of the big goals of Sat Center is educating people, onboarding more Bitcoiners, but also bringing the power back to individuals and allowing people to control the type of community that they want to raise their kids or they want to work in or live in or, create a company and just bolstering those environments. So that way you don't feel like you have to leave to Puerto Rico or leave to El Salvador. Like you can create what you want to see a bright and thriving future with here.
One of my first calls with Trystine about Sat Center, she just at one point in the call, she was like, because I love America. Like she just said that. And we're in the exact same office and she said that. I loved that. And my favorite part about being involved in Sat Center so far is simply the one-on-one conversations I've been able to have with local elected people. Like I've been able to have one-on-one conversations with like state level elected people, city council elected people, just people that are running for office, and just very plain language to look them in the eyes and say like, I'm a Bitcoiner. I'm using Bitcoin instead of fiat money. My family is doing this. I hang out with Bitcoiners. Like, this is what I'm all about. And this is just me as a person doing this. And this is why. And then I'm able to like hear them say things. And to me, that was like the missing piece of kind of like this whole concept of just kind of lobbying or like trying to get things in government changed can be very like theoretical, be very big. But when I'm thinking about politics, I love that word localism because it just simply is, I live here in this town that I enjoy. I do consider myself a local leader, like with an opinion, and I have opinions about the future of the economy and those things. And so sharing that with leaders that may or may not be elected, and even all the way down to like Chamber of Commerce or like school boards, like it doesn't have to be this like big complicated thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that is what Sat Center is going to do well is create these relationships with people before they're in the swamp culture. And I think that's really important because I think it's a breath of fresh air, like you don't go into public service because you hate the world. You go into being a staffer, you go into wanting to run for office because you honestly want to change something. It's typically because, something affected you or a loved one or your community and you thought, oh shoot, I want to get in here and change something. But what does happen is along the way, you obviously get jaded and you get frustrated with the system and the bureaucratic, just tape and ridiculous requirements to try and change something for the better. And so I think throughout the process, a lot of people end up jaded and ultimately just give in to the system and just continue doing what's required. It's like, even though it's not effective or it doesn't work, well, this is the way that it's done, right? And so I think when we're talking to candidates and we're telling them, look, you're going out here and you're saying, I want to bring accountability and trust and transparency. Every politician for the last 20, 30, 40 years has been saying that. but Bitcoin allows you to actually do that. And so I think it's really cool, and it's a unique way, to make sure that we create this future that we want to see. And I think that typically, Bitcoiners, of course, just like most general voting bloc, have become, disenfranchised and irritated with the status quo that is lobbying and advocacy, like you talked about. I mean, I was a lobbyist. I worked in policy. I was a staffer. It's hard. Like, you're trying to change something and you are literally whipping votes, asking for favors, like just trying to get something good done. I remember, like, my breaking point was fighting with somebody to try and get a water well dug so that way people could have water. But because I didn't have the right letter next to my name, like, it didn't work. It wasn't good enough for them. And so I think these are things that really, Bitcoin and showing what it can do in the local level really opens people's eyes and reminds people that, oh, we're just humans. Like, it doesn't have to be this way. We can simplify this. We can create generational wealth. We can, create a way for us to be transparent about where our taxes are going so people are a little less frustrated, right? Like, obviously nobody wants to pay taxes, but the reality of it is, if we at least know where our taxes are going and know that the funds have not been misplaced or, some other kind of ridiculous thing has happened to them, then we'll create a better society ultimately.
What do you think is the biggest difference between how politicians are viewing Bitcoin, like today, January 2022, versus, a year ago, January 2021?
I think if they haven't already talked about it, and if they haven't already asked questions, whether in a negative or a positive way, they are FOMOing in right now, right? They don't want to be known as somebody who hasn't talked about the most viral topic over the last year, even if they have no reason or rhyme to even speak about it. There's certain subcommittees that are planning to discuss Bitcoin and Bitcoin mining over the next couple of weeks, both from Congress down to the state and local level. And the only reason why they're doing it is because they haven't. And it's not because they truly know much about it. I mean, of course, what they know is what's coming from their staffers and what they're reading online. So I think that's really the huge difference. I mean, when I was doing fintech and lobbying, a couple of years ago, I remember like 2 years ago was the first time that in banking and finance and financial services that cryptocurrency was brought up, and nobody in the room had any idea how to answer any questions. And that was a huge problem because at the time they had defaulted to a subject matter expert, so-called, in the room who was very negative against crypto in general, like didn't really specify, didn't break out Bitcoin and crypto or, any different types of tokens or their utilities or anything like that. But it was a huge, misstep for that committee because then all of those members walked away with a negative perception about it. And so I think, just from that 2 years ago, not having any, anybody to represent this industry and decentralized finance as a whole, to the infrastructure bill, to now, you're just seeing this trend and people are trying to figure out what to do. And typically what I notice from the right is the right's like saying, well, we're going to see how this matures and see how this plays out. But like, come on, it's matured. We just celebrated Bitcoin's 13th birthday. And then on the left, you have people who are worried about how it matures, and they're worried about how investors or how consumers could be, gone the wrong way or lose their privacy or, any kind of data restrictions. And so then they want to, therefore, legislate ahead of time. So it's really this like opposite, side of a fight in the legislative world that we're seeing. But I think for the most part, today, we're just seeing people wanting to make sure that they're not missing a viral wave.
Mm-hmm. I do like that it's cool to talk about Bitcoin. It's cool.
Yeah, it's fun, right? Like, I mean, it's funny. I have a lot of friends who work at the IRS and a couple other agencies and even Congressional Budget Office. And for like 5-6 years, they've been telling me, how's your magic internet money doing? And now they're like, hey, so where can I buy Bitcoin? And it's so cool. I love it. Like, I'm not even going to chastise them for it, for, all the crap that they gave me for years. It is cool to talk about Bitcoin. And I think that's why we're in such a good opportunity with these types of organizations and groups that are forming to do advocacy, because if you don't capture it, you're just going to let all of this like harnessed excitement dissipate or go in a different direction that doesn't help Bitcoin.
People give Bitcoin a hard time for like being in an echo chamber or whatever. Everything else has its own echo chamber too. Like, I've lived in like working on political campaign like land and stuff like that too. And I'm like, guys, the way that you talk about what's happening is not how anyone over here talks about what's happening.
Oh, 100%.
how are staffers in that world doing at the staff level?
The staff level, so most staffers, I've seen some unofficial polling and some surveys done with staffers, and most of them are holding a very small amount, typically from, an easy to use custodial option, right? Like Cash App or something that's super simple. And so for, staffers, the adoption rate is much slower, but we are working on creating an opportunity for staffers to learn more about buying and holding their own Bitcoin. There's a couple lunch and learns that we're trying to schedule with staffers because you're right, they are younger and typically they have way more debt than any other staffer in the past has ever had. Mostly, obviously, college debt, which is a better debt in theory, but it's still something that really affects them, and they really worry about ever purchasing a home or ever purchasing any other kind of asset. And so I think in general, it's a very slow adoption, but it's going, it's there. And I think what you talked about with being in the echo chambers, yeah, we talk about that all the time in politics. You're so in the weeds because you're in it, right? You're in the trenches every day talking about this and working in this industry that you forget that there's a whole world out there. And while Bitcoin's adoption globally is huge, it's still so small in the day-to-day lives of people, right? Like most people who are, say doing janitorial jobs at the Capitol have no idea about what's even happening at the Capitol. Like they have no idea about what's happening in legislation, and they work there, right? It's different. And so I think that's something that we really need to focus on is going to these communities. And that's why I think Sat Center will probably do a very good job at this, because as we focus on community and as we focus on localism, that's how you're reaching people. You're not reaching people through the masses of, mainstream media. Like that's really only reaching the people who are craving certain kind of propaganda. That's not really getting to them. That's not educating them. And that's not pulling them out of the river, right? And getting them on this life raft. So I think that's something that we really need to try really hard on, but in the future. And remember that not everyone's on Twitter. I know a ton of people who own Bitcoin who are not even on Twitter, have never even stepped into Bitcoin Twitter. And so I think that's always nice to remind ourselves of too.
So what can a regular Bitcoiner do to participate in Sat Center and just kind of helping educate the local leaders in their area?
So much, and I can't wait to bring everyone in. So what we've been doing as a founding member, I wanted to obviously get this association off the ground, up and running, and get all of the companies that are Bitcoin companies involved. And so throughout doing this process, one of the hardest things obviously was getting a bank account open, which is a very huge requirement to be able to do anything, right? Because I want to be able to pay for educational resources and classes and events and be able to take in people's, membership dues so that way we can do that. And so we finally just got approved. It took multiple votes from multiple boards to approve us and ask ridiculous questions about why or how we'll be using cryptocurrency. But we finally got it. And so what that means is now people, individuals, and also companies can pay membership dues into the association, and then the association will use that money to continue to fund the mission. And so the way that people can get involved is there will be, routine meetings that will be held. There's the board of directors meetings, and then there's certain committee meetings, but there's also association meetings, which is where Bitcoiners can obviously have a voice in voting for certain things for the association, but also can say, when there's a request of, hey, there's, a mayor in Colorado who needs to be briefed, who can be there, who's in Colorado, then obviously these people can be the first people called in front line of defense because they're the residents there. They have the most impact. They should be the ones talking to them. We can all talk about what Bitcoin means to us till we're blue in the face, but if you're not actually living in that community, you don't know how best you could use Bitcoin to fix that community.
This is my favorite part. So I just want to highlight this. My favorite part of what's happening is, if you live, we'll just roll with the Colorado example. If you live in Colorado and you're like doing the meetup thing or just like meeting people, and then you run into local leaders, they're like, oh, I may be interested in that. You now have a place where you can like basically like fulfillment, like back end fulfillment of the Bitcoin meeting. Like you should obviously run with ball as far as you can and educate the person like on your own. But if you need to feel like they would enjoy having some more structure or like have another organization or something, you can introduce them to Sat Center, and Sat Center will find Bitcoiners in their area to meet with them and like come alongside them and show them how Bitcoin can help their community. So that's what you can do without ever even, you don't have to pay any money to Sat Center. You don't have to do
Yep.
anything. You just, by being a leader and being a networker, just know that there's like a grassroots organization that can come along specifically built to educate like local leaders. It's very similar to how I talk a lot about how if you run the meetup and you have a restaurant that's then they like, as soon as you get someone who's like, hey, I'm open to taking Bitcoin, like Trystine, this just happened to her. Like her friend runs a coffee shop. Hey, I'm open to taking Bitcoin. We're able to like send her to OpenNode and they're able to like run with the ball of like getting it set up. So
Yep.
because Trystine and I don't have the bandwidth to like set up that exact person. Like we're farming out the work to people. We're matching up Bitcoin opportunities with people. So that's what Sat Center does. It's like back end fulfillment of the Bitcoin meetings.
Yeah, and I think it's really important to remember that like at no point in history has the community that you end up living in just appeared, right? Like you have to create the groundwork. You have to do the work to create a framework for what you want that to be. And since we're all Bitcoiners and we want to go to a Bitcoin standard and we want to have, you know, this level of education and understanding about Bitcoin in our communities, we have to put in the work. But all of us work day jobs, and so we have to start tapping in and using these people. And you know, a lot of people talk about, you know, pleb-based movements and how you can use those. And this is exactly it, because there are Bitcoin meetups all over the place, and there are Bitcoiners all over the place. I was just in Idaho for vacation, and on Sunday, I met with 2 Bitcoiners who are starting a Bitcoin policy network there to be able to help introduce legislation in Idaho. And so we're helping create, you know, a way for them to be able to hold Bitcoin on their balance sheet, and then future start thinking of different ways that we can start tying it into local areas in that neighborhood, because there are people who are ready and willing, they just don't know how. And so you have to show them the way. You have to create a guidebook. You have to introduce, like you said, people to OpenNode or whoever it is that they need to learn from and understand, and start showing this blueprint for, hey, we did it in this community, here's how you can do it in yours. And so that's what I think we're going to see a lot of in 2022, not just from our group, but from so many people. And it's so exciting. I mean, I get so many emails and DMs a day about, hey, I'm meeting with so-and-so, please tell me what I can say to them, or, you know, what type of, you know, program or type of product that I can offer them for them to easily be able to hold Bitcoin, or, you know, pay their employees in Bitcoin, or come up with accounts payable, and all these different things. And so it's incredible, and it's so exciting, and it's happening at a much faster rate than I think any of us ever anticipated.
Mm-hmm. Okay, 2 more questions and then we'll get your final thoughts. Number 1, how does Bitcoin win? What is the path that you think Bitcoin wins on?
I think it is honestly tied to a free market in a way, right? Like what we saw in Wyoming, where they created, you know, a slew of, you know, data asset laws. They were really going after, modeling it after Rhode Island's, you know, laws that allowed for LLCs and companies and corporate entities to be able to easily exist and create and stay up to the curve with technology. But you know, when you look at those things, that really just created a ton of government oversight and additional regulation. And so I think how Bitcoin wins is not necessarily through creating laws or creating new regulation or, you know, departments or all these things. I think it's arming people with education, you know, taking people away from the comforts of the Fed and teaching them about their individuality and their freedom and their sovereignty and being able to be their own bank. And then I think it's honestly just changing certain words in either state constitutions or uniformity of code, so that way Bitcoin companies can continue to infiltrate into different states and be able to offer their products and services to people who are interested. And then from there, the adoption will keep growing. And that's what I think is so interesting about what we're working on in a couple of different states. We're really just going to change a couple words in certain constitutions or codes that are just saying that the state can hold Bitcoin, or that the Treasury's office can hold Bitcoin, right? Because then that just gives you the opportunity, and I think goes to Bitcoin's ethos a little bit more of just people can opt in if they would like. We're not forcing a state to have to hold Bitcoin, and we're not forcing any agency or department to be able to, you know, use Bitcoin. But what we're saying is you have the capability to. And then I think once people are educated and understand why that would be a good idea, then it would be a no-brainer. And then Bitcoin is ultimately winning, because more and more people will understand why this is an option and why it's important and why they should choose to do so, without us, you know, really yelling at them as a toxic maxi on Bitcoin Twitter. Like, it allows them into the system. They're opting in at their own rate. And I think that's how Bitcoin really wins, especially in America, just because Americans don't want to be told to do something. You can't just start coming in with kind of the way that El Salvador is doing it, right? Like, we're not the same country. And so you can't follow the same framework. You have to allow for it to figure itself out and run its own course, much like a river.
That's amazing. I like that answer. That's really good. Okay, and I've been working on asking each guest this question. What's a Bitcoin product or service that doesn't exist yet that you would use and like want to use?
I think something that has to do with accounting and being able to handle, for example, we paid the carolers from, the Christmas party in Bitcoin. But I had to do that from my personal account to be able to send it to them. And then I had to send a fiat invoice to my company because there's no software that handles, expenses and accounting in Bitcoin right now. There's no easy way for large companies to be able to track that. And I think that would honestly lead to adoption so fast because companies would then be able to say, oh yeah, I have this way to be able to account for this. Like, easy, done. I could pay you in Bitcoin, or I can easily file this report, especially if you're a publicly traded company, when you have to be very transparent in where the money went and why it went somewhere. I think that's huge.
All right, that's a great answer, because shout out to our Choice CFO. That's the exact same way we've been sponsoring these Bitcoin meetups also, is sending the Bitcoin and then the fiat reimbursement. So that's I like that answer. I'm going to get him on for an episode and we will chase this down.
Yes.
All right, Trystine, final thoughts. Close us out and tell us where to find you and where to find SatCenter.
Yeah, so you can find me on Twitter at Trystine Ann, and you can find SatCenter on Twitter as well. Our email, info@satcenter.org, works now, thank goodness. It was not working for 2 weeks. The DNS was a little bit off, so we couldn't get emails or send them out. So now we're able to respond to people and get people connected with who they're looking for. And I think, be on the lookout for the next couple of months when we talk about elections for board of directors and when there's the opportunity for people to join as individuals, so we can really tap people into this network and let it do its own thing and take off.
Love it. All right, everyone. We'll see you on the next one.
Bye.
Hey all, this is Brian. You can reach me on Twitter at Brain Harrington. Shoot me a DM with any feedback from today's episode. This has been a Choice App production. Bitcoin is becoming centric to personal finance, and we want to help you learn how to better engage with Bitcoin financial services. None of this is financial advice and is for education and entertainment only.